taking part in things that I kind of question now, because war's not like anything else.
I thought I'd like to work with the women veterans, letting them tell their stories, and then make it into a book project. And everybody knows what a paper doll is.
Returning GIs, they survived the war. They needed to come back and create rather than destroy.
Everything here is made from scratch, from the hide. I like to stick to tradition.
Major funding for Craft in America was provided by Cynthia Lovelace Sears and Frank Buxton, Lillian Pearson Lovelace, L.L. Brownrigg, Helen and Peter Bing, Stolaroff Foundation, Sherry and Les Biller Family Foundation. Additional support was provided by the following.
Once you're exposed to war, that kind of violence on that scale, I think it does change you in a way. The guy that went to the war isn't the same person that comes back. That's a big, powerful weight in your life. My father was in Vietnam, my granddad on my mom's side was in World War II, and I joined the Marine Corps in 1989, and was in Desert Shield, Desert Storm, the Gulf War. I thought that's how men became men, was being in the military. I believed in America, and I believed in the New World Order, which was talking about that we were the good guys fighting the good war.
This will not stand. This will not stand, this aggression against the white.
I've taken part in things that I kind of question now. I know that if things had gone this way or that way in a situation, I would have done bad things. Because war's not like anything else. Got out of the Marine Corps, and the idea was to go to school, find something I like to do. I had the GI Bill paid, covered everything, so I kind of fell into art. I guess coming back from the war, I wanted to talk about that a little bit, but wasn't sure how. And I started with drawing and painting, but that seemed like too big or too kind of overtly didactic or something, But the cup, it's a little thing. It's not confrontational. It's just a cup.
Aaron Toole has gone off to war, witnessed the horrors of it, but instead of shying away from it, he's decided that he wants to address it. And I love the idea of him coming back and being invested in the material, but Aaron has decided to be socially invested in what the message of his ceramics is going to be. And it's all shaped around this like simple, humble cup.
Why a cup? Because I think the cup's the appropriate scale to talk about issues of war and violence, and in the shape, it's just the shape that feels good in my hand. And that's the way I want them to be used, is hand to hand. There's over 14,000 cups that I've made and given away now. You know, it is a vocation, right? It's something I feel called to do, is to make these little silly cups and give them away. Use lots of different molds. People will let me borrow their insignia, and I'll make a mold, and then I make them a set of cups with their insignia that they rate on it. And then a bunch of the other stuff is just toys, you know. This is the gas mask I wore in the 91 Gulf War, thinking that the air was poison, and now it's a toy for ages 6 and up. It's kind of surreal to see how military culture is translated into civilian culture. My wife calls my work war awareness art. You know, I'm not so concerned if you're for or against the specific war, but that you're ignorant of what's happening is not okay with me. I think, you know, when the cups are the best is when they spark a conversation between somebody who knows what the images are and somebody who doesn't. I think most people who have been through war, they don't talk about it. So sometimes I think the cups can be that little spur to start a conversation that wouldn't happen otherwise.
I got like 2 pieces.
My son's 9, and you know, we still haven't had that conversation.
What?
He asked me, he said, "Dad, how come you're bad and now you're good?" And I said, "What?" He said, "You were a soldier, right?" And I just started crying. I said, "Let's go watch SpongeBob." You know, I couldn't, because I didn't know how to communicate that. I'm just putting decals on cups. The printer I have has iron oxide in the ink, and so we can print out onto water slide decal paper and then refire the cup high enough that the iron oxide melts into it. When I use the decals, I can actually get photographs of people, and that makes it a little more personal. Calling me anti-war, you know, it's not that simple. I enjoyed my time in the Marine Corps. I met some really great guys. We did some amazing things. But, I mean, the 91 Gulf War was a cakewalk compared to what a lot of the guys are going through now, I think. My job at Berkeley is all the technical stuff, loading the kilns, firing the kilns, making the glaze, making the clay. I'm not the instructor, but, you know, I work with the kids, but more on the technical side of things. There's nothing I do I think is going to change the world, but there's There's nothing in the world that releases me from my obligation to try. I don't believe in memorials, but I made the 1.5-second war memorial, and it's just the cup being shot and the cup being shot. If you wanted to watch it for everybody killed in World War II, you'd have to watch it for almost 2 years at 1.5 seconds per life. If you want to watch it for the Americans killed in my war, you watch it for like 8 minutes. Those cups, all those cups could have gone unchipped for 500,000 to 1 million years. But a little piece of lead found them, and they're broken forever. In the same way, all the war dead, they could have had kids and grandkids and contribute to medicine or something, but a little piece of lead found them, and all that possibilities no more. I think that peace is the only adequate war memorial.
Crafts in the military goes a long ways back. Before World War II, the military was trying to find ways to make sure that the morale and welfare of the service members was being maintained during that period of preparing for the war. So in 1941, Brigadier General Osborne was asked to lead the Committee on Recreation and Community Service.
He already had an interest in craft because his sister was Aileen Osborne Webb, and she launches the American Craft Council in 1943. And if you have an agenda as much as Aileen Osborne Webb did, I'm sure Frederick had no choice but to love and appreciate and implement such a thing through the Army.
From that grew the Arts and Crafts program. They initially started out with trying to provide recreation to our servicemen and women while they were in barracks, but particularly after Pearl Harbor. The program provided activities to those that were in staging areas, preparing for combat.
One of the things that we don't really think about, and when we think about war, is there's a lot of downtime. And by providing a space where the military servicemen could be working with their hands, all sorts of interesting things came out of that. For example, Marines on ships were issued a standard trench knife, but then they took lucite and acrylic from windshields of fighters that had been broken and made these beautiful objects that are just as good as some of the best 20th century design.
At the same time, at Walter Reed Hospital, they're using art and crafts to work with wounded men to help rehabilitate them, to bring them back to society. Both the Army and the Red Cross focus more on the craft than they do the fine arts because they saw actually therapeutic results from this work.
Today, the Arts and Crafts program continues to provide that service. They're located through all our bases. People can go in and experience ceramics, woodworking, metals. They get assistance and instruction by other artists. So there are a lot of creative individuals in the military.
Ceramics is personal to me. I really enjoy the process. But one thing that really gets me is the smell that clay gives off. I can describe it as kind of like morning rain. I mean, to have it in your hands, the whole experience, you get so involved, caught up into it. I enjoy that movement of that personal little story that you could really shape into your piece. I grew up in a small town in California named Visalia. That's where I first was introduced to ceramic work. I used to surf in California, but I don't surf anymore. I signed up in 2002, went to basic training in 2003. I want to protect who I love, so I thought the military would be the best way to do that. I did 2 tours in Iraq. We were in a convoy as the lead vehicle. I was gunning on top of the vehicle. We went across IED on the side of the road.
And a few days later, I was shipped to Walter Reed.
And my life changed at that moment as I saw the man who's sitting there with, no legs, says, "Hey, you gotta move on." And that's his attitude. He likes to do things as much as he can on his own. He says you're as disabled as you want to be.
I utilized the wheel, but the only adaptation I had to take on was the foot pedal. Using my prosthetic to try to operate, it was very confusing since I don't have an ankle. At Walter Reed, I did rehabilitation for about a year. They have an art center, so that's where I started to go back to ceramics.
I would drop him off and he would spend a few hours there, created all these different things, and after a few months, he finally shared with me that a lot of the markings on them, it was an expression of what he was feeling and going through. So I'll never look at those cups the same again. I thought, oh, neat design. But I can see his art now, and I understand Jude. And he speaks through it.
This is throwing a piece in sections. I just throw the base as one section, and then when I move to the next section, I flip it over and attach it. There's more moisture in the connecting areas than any other part of the clay. You need to be a little bit more careful. Give it time to dry out by using a heat gun. After my rehab, we live in an apartment not very wheelchair accessible.
Service members that are severely injured, they get an adaptive housing grant, which is $64,000. With that amount of money, you could get maybe one bathroom that would be accessible, but not an entire house. But Homes for Our Troops came along. These are licensed contractors that donate their time for severely injured service members. Can you get plates?
Yeah, I'll get plates. It's perfectly adapted to me when I'm in my wheelchair.
the kitchen countertops are lower. If he's in his chair, he can roll under, use the sink as well as the stove, the island. He can get everything that's in here. It's all at his level.
So now I have to do dishes. So since I can get under the dish,
there's no excuse now. He can do it all.
We got to figure out the shape. Just got to look at it. Got to step back. You got to step back and look at it. This is where you get to either have fun or get really upset.
He's served, he's sacrificed, he's healed through pottery.
I'm still here. I still have something to do. I'm still on this planet. I gotta do something to improve it. So, and I think with art, that's the way I'm doing it.
We are very blessed. We have a great life because we've had support. His attitude. Life is good.
In the White House at Washington, President Roosevelt approves legislation to provide for America's war veterans in the peace to come.
The GI Bill turns about 70 years old this year, and it's one of the great pieces of legislation that has been passed. And while over the years it's changed through the various times and periods of war that we've gone through, it essentially has afforded millions of veterans to continue their education, and as a result of that, our country has benefited.
The law gave access to a higher education at college and university level, and it was this access that developed into an explosion in the arts post-World War II.
Returning GIs, they survived the war. They lived. They needed to come back and create rather than destroy. And to learn, to know, to understand. The world was their oyster, and they were going to have it by hook or crook. One of these artists is William Daley, and he becomes a gunner in the Air Force, and his plane was shot down, and he wound up becoming a prisoner of war. He comes back from the war and decides he is going to try for art school. And with the GI Bill, now he can. That moment, that catalytic moment, just changed everything. And he is still making today. He's extremely spry.
You have artists like Ramona Solberg of Seattle who were a part of the GI Bill. Ramona was in the WAC, Women's Auxiliary Corps, and she loved the entire military experience. She even called basic training girls' camp. What strikes me about Ramona's work is that she takes materials from all different things, pulls them together, but it seems weighted, and it seems formal, and it seems right.
Harvey Littleton, his father's the inventor of Pyrex, and he, using his GI Bill, goes back to school to become a potter at first, but to then bring in glass, which was really an industrial material, set off what became the American studio glass movement.
Arthur Espinette Carpenter took advantage of the GI Bill and used it to set up his studio in San Francisco. He alone had over 130 apprentices come through his studio, so he influenced an entire generation of woodworkers. And you have J.B. Blunk, who, on furlough from the Korean War in Japan, just happens to meet Isamu Noguchi at a folk pottery store. From that conversation, J.B. Blunk goes on to study the rich ceramics tradition in Japan, which then affected the rest of his career. He would wake up in the morning and look at those beautiful logs that he drug off the coast. His work is very reductive. He sees the form and then he just reveals it. But when you think about post-war ceramics, there's one figure that comes to mind, and that's Peter Voulkos.
He was in the Air Force. He was a gunner on a plane. And I think when he came out, he had a chance to go to the GI Bill to actually do something. I think Pete never thought of not working with his hand.
When I went to school, I studied painting. I wanted to be a painter. But I was forced into doing a clay course, to get out of school. So I took that class, and that completely changed my life right there. As soon as I started feeling that clay, that was a big change for me. I couldn't paint anymore. It was just gone completely.
He first starts off with a really tight idea of what pottery is. He's making pots that we're familiar with, like well-crafted pots, well-designed pots. They look like the pots that we expect, but he starts pushing against those borders, starts pushing against the conventions.
In 1953, he had an experience at Black Mountain College where he met John Cage, Rauschenberg, and other East Coast abstract expressionists who, blew his mind away.
It was the first time I'd heard a poetry reading, first time I'd seen modern dance happen, so it was a big revelation to me, and my mouth was just open all the time.
His experiences of war, his time in school to find the material he was always meant to work with, and the idea of furthering his mind intellectually allowed Voulkos to set his work on a new path, to think of his work not as functional anymore, but as sculptural.
The whole idea of not just making a pot or a vase or a teapot was incredible. Because suddenly you realize you could do anything. And that's what Pete's philosophy was.
He cuts into them. He violates their vesselness, which is against the law in ceramics. And this body of work really upset the field. You were either on the functional end or are now on this revolutionary sculptural end.
If people resist what I'm doing, I just dwell on that stuff. I said, this guy isn't getting it, and he resists it, and that's all well and good to me, because I don't expect to be understood at that kind of level.
When I first came to UC Berkeley and met Pete, he actually was not doing clay anymore. He was casting bronze. And every night we'd be casting till 5 in the morning. We understood each other. We didn't have to talk so much about stuff. Then he started making plate again to make money, basically, because it's expensive to cast bronze.
He took ceramics and he said, this is a material for personal expression. This is about wrestling with materials. And Voulkos, in front of large classes and students, he just spread the gospel of what it was to attack a material and to make it your own.
was very physical when you worked. I mean, it was like a boxer, you know, running on this thing, running around, and you would be without shirt on and slapping this thing and cutting.
It's almost as if the process and the act of creating is the work.
Peter Voulkos came back in the war and changed what our idea of what ceramics is, or what our idea of what craft could be, and brought ceramics more into the realm of fine art.
His work is the flesh made real. It's dynamic, it's powerful, it's fearless. It's fearless work.
I've been making things, I would say, my whole life. I was a Girl Scout and super into doing all of the projects to get the badges. I think I got all but 4 badges, which was crazy. I still have that sash. In fact, I've worn it for Halloween a few years ago. The uniform still fits me. To this day, I'm still making things. I'm a paper maker. The Combat Paper Project was born back in 2007. We would invite the veteran population to come in and make paper from their uniforms. This is a way to honor it and give it a second life. But Combat Paper workshops were mostly male-dominated. Maybe like 1 woman a month would show up. Yeah, she actually emailed me. And so I thought I'd like to work with the women veterans, letting them tell their stories and then make it into a book project. And I knew I wanted it to be a paper doll book because to a lot of people, you know, a female soldier is such a foreign idea that I wanted something familiar. Everybody knows what a paper doll is.
This is your ribbon. It's red, gold, red with 2 little black stripes, I believe.
All these women wore the uniforms illustrated in the book.
And you played trumpet. Then we're going to include that, right? Right. Okay.
And all of the women wrote their own stories.
Okay. Do you still have your uniform? No, I still have the hat. Do you?
The criteria was that it had to be a story about a part or parts of your military uniform.
I've never forgotten what being uniformed can mean. During the height of the Vietnam War, I enlisted in the Army as an 18-year-old and was assigned as a trumpet player in the 14th Women's Army Corps Band stationed at Fort McClellan, Alabama. We were required to look our best at all times. We had to wear red lipstick, nylons, and the ugliest Army-issued black shoes, which we were taught to spit shine. During 1969 to 1972, there were many returning caskets. Wearing my dress uniform skirt and jacket, playing taps for our fallen changed my life. To see a mother throw herself over the casket of her fallen son and then thank me for playing taps for him is an honor I will never forget.
The cutting of my uniform for Combat Paper was difficult. And that uniform is an hallowed object that we are trained to care for and trained to keep in perfect, pristine, good working order. and indeed you end up putting it in a machine and beating it to a pulp. Literally beat your uniform to a pulp. During my deployment to Kabul, Afghanistan in 2010, I often wondered why some women still wore a burqa. The first time I saw a woman in a burqa, my heart cried out. I wanted to stop the vehicle and get out and talk with her, woman to woman. Yet, I was in full battle rattle, Kevlar helmet and bulletproof vest. And one doesn't just get out of the vehicle and run up to the locals and start a conversation. I realized that freedom also means the right to wear a burqa. If she chose to wear one, I would die for her right to do so. Maybe that is what I should tell her. Me, in full battle rattle, telling her I am prepared to die. How believable would I be?
Papermaking began in 105 AD. The process is super old. This particular style of papermaking with clothing rag is the mid-8th century. And it has its beginnings of making paper from clothing from the Arab Muslim world.
This is how you can go from making a few sheets to a few hundred sheets in a day. Like, what can we do?
350?
Yeah, 350 sheets in a day. That's pretty good, I think.
If you look at an old paper mill, it'd be between 1,000 and 2,000 sheets.
Yeah, but they have how many more people working for them? We have 2, okay? I think we're pretty good.
Wow, it'll be a decade since I was in the Air Force. I served for 2 years, and to this day, I still carry my purse over my left shoulder to keep my right hand free for a salute. I owe it all to that military standard issued black purse and deep-rooted programming. Imagine 1/3 of a cereal box on its side, wrapped in bonded leather, with a pewter clasp and a single fold-over flap. It marks the beginning of a powerful rite of passage where you will quickly assimilate into a new culture, one that you will leave behind one day, one that won't necessarily leave you.
I'm drying it's a restraint dryer, and this way the paper is going to dry perfectly flat in 12 to 24 hours, depending on how thick the paper is. Asking somebody to tell a story through a part of their clothing is like a really gentle entry into allowing somebody to talk about whatever they want to talk about. It was really emotional for some of the women.
I served in the Navy and preferred the male working uniform over our utilities. The female uniform fit my body like a glove, and therefore I would receive unwarranted and definitely unwanted attention. Attempting to pick larger size pants made no real difference. So I'll wear the men's issue, blue dinky pants and shirt, in the style I felt my strongest. I believe that as long as I dress loosely, keeping my assets covered, all will be well. My attack taught me something different. I loved being in the Navy. I served on the USS Germantown for a good 5 years. I've traveled the world. So my experience is such a hard one because of my sexual assault. It was a friend, someone who I actually met right after boot camp, and we ended up meeting up at the same ship. And then being violated in that way is really hard to explain, because a lot of people, they try to put that, the way that a woman dresses is the type of attention that she'll get. Excuse me. And it's completely opposite.
On to the next word, which is villages.
Villages, yeah. The typesetting was a way to engage the women in the project. and to really help them to connect to their stories, their words.
Certain villages.
That all has to be done by hand. So how the stories turned out on the page is pretty much up to the woman's discretion.
This was a big thing to be a part of this project. I set my own type. In fact, I'm the champion. I did my entire page the quickest, so I'm pretty proud of that. I thought about all the times that I was wearing my uniform and something pivotal in my life happened. And for me, the story of 9/11 was the most life-changing moment. Right out of high school in June of 2000, I joined the Army National Guard. You know, 1 week in the month, 2 weeks in the summer kind of deal. I joined because I wanted a challenge, something no one thought I would or could do. I was working at a restaurant in Southern Virginia when the first plane hit the World Trade Center. That sucks, I thought, as I heard the news. I continued going about my morning, pouring coffee and taking breakfast orders. When the plane hit the Pentagon, I knew things were about to change dramatically. I contacted my unit in Virginia Beach and was told to get there immediately. I rushed home, took off my waitress uniform, and put on my Army uniform. I rolled up my sleeves and attached my MP Brassard. After I put on my beret, I looked in the mirror. I saw a woman who was prepared to defend her country. September 11th, 2001 was the day I stopped being a 19-year-old kid and the day I became a soldier.
We printed over 6,000 screen prints. By hand, one at a time. We went with mostly one-color ink, and we decided to color in the details on it, because there were certain things that were important to these women, like their ribbons, and those we really had to show in color. And I did that with just some archival pens. I just sat on my couch and colored for months. Collating the pages, I have 21 screen printed illustrations on handmade paper and then 20 printed stories with handset type. I'm not a veteran, but yet I've learned a lot in working with this project. For me, this was a really successful collaboration.
If we, the men and women who serve in the United States military with boots on the ground in combat zones, if we don't tell our stories, the real truth and the whole truth will never be known. And that's why I'm involved in this project.
I have a 3-year-old daughter, and I know I'm very proud of my military service. And the whole paper dolls thing, it was like, I get a chance to show my daughter that, look, this is what women can do.
When I seen the finished product, and I was like, oh my gosh, and like, I'm a paper doll, like, who could ever, like, cool, this is cool, I'm a paper doll.
After working on this book, I really feel like a gap was bridged. Hopefully the people that read it will just put aside any preconceived ideas about women in the military, and we're just, we're all in this together. That was, for me, like, I value that the most.
I've been really lucky in getting opportunities to show my work and make work with different people and different communities. Get the story out.
Met Clay Studio is a 40-year-old arts organization dedicated purely to the ceramic arts. You can see what we're working on here today. It's just going to be Jesse and Aaron for 40 straight hours. These guys, they're on display, but they're interacting with our audience and reaching out to other veterans.
What time did you start?
8-ish.
You're going all day?
Until we collapse. Yeah. Most of the people that come to the events, I think, are just craft people, but a few veterans show up, and it's sometimes hard, but it's healing. Jesse went back to the same piece of sand I was at and had a war with the same guy I had a war with, and so now my story's overlapping with his.
I think a good example of what the whole deal was like for me is got mobilized. I was in graduate school for ceramics and then didn't have the ceramic, clay inserts that go in your body armor that actually stop the bullets. Yeah, like $100 piece of clay, that's showbiz.
Craft is a great way to rebel, and I think we're sort of working with a couple of gentlemen who've keyed into ways to inject meaning and inject language into clay, and the making of the art becomes a two-way conversation.
How do the ideas come in terms of what do you want to put on the cups?
Well, there's always new images of war, unfortunately, coming out, and so...
Yeah. What is that one from? We are either going to have a future where women lead the way to make peace with the earth, or we are not going to have a human future at all. Vandana Shiva. Nice.
Making art and sharing the objects with people, I believe it's a worthwhile expenditure of my time, my life. It's really hard for me to ignore those young guys that are still out in the sand, and it's close to my heart.
The U.S. Army caisson platoon is one of two military ceremonial units. We laying our loved ones to rest, our soldiers to rest. We give our fallen soldiers the respect and the proper burial that they deserve. My position in the U.S. Army caisson platoon is a saddler and leathersmith. I originally learned my craft from my grandmother. She was a dressmaker, and every time she would sew, she would actually have me sitting there, and I spent most of my time with my grandmother, and pretty much everything that I am today has a lot to do with what my grandmother taught me.
What I'm doing now is what it's called creasing. And all of the military equipment has a crease line in it. We use it also as a stitch line. So it gives us a guide to keep our stitches straight. The tack that we use has a great tradition behind it. Everything here is made from scratch from the hide. Only thing we order is the hardware. This book is pretty much our Bible for how we construct all of our attacks for the U.S. Army case opportunity. We had a warrant officer that he actually found this book in the supply room. He just came in one day glowing and it's like, guess what I found? And I was like, really? Prior to this, we really didn't have a set standard of how we would fabricate tack. Now, everything that we make is to the specifications here. You really can't argue with this. A very important part of what we do is to make sure that the tack fits well. Is that anything that is exposed to the horse, you have to make sure instead of having a surface like that where it can rub, you've skied the edge of it so that you get a smooth surface and it won't cut them. Regular hand punch. Some of those straps have anywhere from 12 to 14 holes in it. This right here is, I'm actually setting the stitch row where I'm going to actually be hand sewing. This marker right here is just give little tick marks as where I'm going to put my needle at. This is called a saddler stitch. And the difference between this and the machine stitches, with a chain stitch, like on a sewing machine, if one stitch goes, it pretty much rips. Versus this stitch here, you can break 2 or 3 stitches and everything else will still stay in place. Because each time you go through, it's actually going to pierce the thread I just went through. So it holds it in place. The job that we do is so repetitive, every day doing it, and it happens so early in the morning. It's hard work, and it wears you out physically, emotionally. It's difficult for a soldier to stay here for 3 years or 4 years and do this.
Everything has to be 100% perfect at all times, you know. We ride white horses, so a lot of times white hairs all over our uniform. Doesn't matter. Everything that we do, it's full of honor and pride. It has to be completely perfect at all times.
the teams will be hooking up around about 7:30 every day. During that time, we will go ahead and do a walkthrough or an inspection.
You need to get 2 shorter cheek straps, and you'll get the adjustment out of it.
My biggest concern is making sure that the horses are tacked up right. If the horse is uncomfortable, he's going to be worried about this strap that's too tight or is rubbing me. It's very difficult for him to pay attention to what you want him to do.
You ain't gonna make it easy.
So their comfort comes first, and then just making sure they look their best. The spit and shine polished. That's honor God. That's the old God. That's what we're all about.
Ready, out. Swing.
Ready.
Ready. Ready. Well, ready. Face up. Forward. Out. Face up. Forward. Out.
I take a lot of pride, and I try to be consistent in what I do. I like to stick to tradition. And I just try to instill in them that every time they're laying someone to rest, that each funeral should be done the same way, regardless of if it's Private Johnson or President Kennedy. The standard is the standard every time that they go out. This job I've been doing for years, and I'm truly blessed to be able to serve in the Quezon team.
Funding for Craft in America was provided by Cynthia Lovelace Sears and Frank Buxton, Lillian Pearson Lovelace, L.L. Brownrigg, Helen and Peter Bing, Stolaroff Foundation, Sherry and Les Biller Family Foundation. Additional support was provided by the following. Additional video online, including more interviews and artists at work. Plus, visit a virtual exhibition of objects from America's leading artists. Visit Craft in America at pbs.org. This episode of Craft in America is available on DVD. The Craft in America DVD collection, which includes past seasons, is also available. To order, visit shoppbs.org or call us at 1-800-PLAY-PBS.